Welcome to the Deep Sleep channel. Tonight we're reading one of the most beloved stories ever written. A story about a girl named Alice who falls down a rabbit hole and enters a strange world. A world where logic is turned upside down. A world where impossible things happen constantly. A world where anything can happen and usually does. This is the complete story of Alice's adventures in Wonderland, written by Lewis Carroll. First published in 1865, this tale has captivated readers for over 150 years. It's a story of wonder and whimsy. It's a story about growing up and finding your place in a confusing world. It's a meditation on imagination and possibility. Close your eyes. Let yourself follow Alice down the rabbit hole. Let yourself enter Wonderland. Let yourself experience the strange, beautiful, impossible world that awaits. Let yourself drift into sleep as we read this classic tale that has brought joy to children and adults for generations. This is a story about adventure, friendship, mystery, and the power of imagination. Alice was beginning to get very tired of sitting by her sister on the bank and of having nothing to do. Once or twice she had peeped into the book her sister was reading, but it had no pictures or conversations in it, and what is the use of a book without pictures or conversations? So she was considering in her own mind, as well as she could, for the hot day made her feel very sleepy and stupid, whether the pleasure of making a daisy chain would be worth the trouble of getting up and picking the daisies, when suddenly a white rabbit with pink eyes ran close by her. There was nothing so very remarkable in that, nor did Alice think it so very much out of the way to hear the rabbit say to itself, oh dear, I shall be late." But when the rabbit actually took a watch out of its waistcoat pocket and looked at it anxiously, Alice started to her feet, for it flashed across her mind that she had never before seen a rabbit with either a waistcoat pocket or a watch to take out of it. Burned with curiosity, she ran across the field after the rabbit, and was just in time to see it pop down a large rabbit hole under the hedge. In another moment down went Alice after it, never once considering how in the world she was to get out again. The rabbit hole went straight on like a tunnel for some way, and then dipped suddenly down so suddenly that Alice had not a moment to think about stopping herself before she found herself falling down what seemed to be a very deep well. Either the well was very deep, or she fell very slowly, for she had plenty of time as she went down to look about her and to wonder what was going to happen next. First she tried to look down and make out what she was coming to, but it was too dark to see anything. Then she looked at the sides of the well and noticed that they were filled with cupboards and bookshelves. Here and there she saw maps and pictures hung upon pegs. She took down a jar as she passed. It was labelled orange marmalade, but to her great disappointment it was empty. She did not like to drop the jar for fear of killing somebody underneath, so she managed to put it into one of the cupboards as she fell past it. Well, thought Alice to herself, after such a fall as this, I shall think nothing of tumbling downstairs. How brave they'll think me at home. Why, I wouldn't say anything about it, even if I fell off the top of the house, which was very likely true. Down, down, down. Would the fall never come to an end? I wonder how many miles I've fallen by this time, she said aloud. I must be getting somewhere near the center of the earth. Let me think. That would be 4,000 miles down, I think, for you see, Alice had learned several things of this sort in her lessons in the schoolroom, and though this was not a very good opportunity for showing off her knowledge, as there was no one to hear her, still it was good practice to say it over. Yes, that's about the right distance, but then I wonder what latitude or longitude I've got to. Alice had no idea what latitude was, or longitude either, but she thought they were nice, grand words to say. Presently she began again. I wonder if I shall fall right through the earth. How funny that would be. The antipathies, I think. She was rather glad there was no one listening, for she rather doubted whether it was the right word. But to continue. Yes, I'd come out among the people that walk with their heads downwards, in the antipathies, I think. She was interrupted by a sudden jolt, and down she came upon a heap of sticks and dry leaves, and the fall was over. Alice was not a bit hurt, and she jumped up onto her feet in a moment. She looked up, but it was all dark overhead. Before her was another long passage, and the white rabbit was still in sight, hurrying down it. There was not a moment to be lost. Away went Alice like the wind, and was just in time to hear it say as it turned a corner, "Oh, my ears and whiskers, how late it's getting." She was close behind it when she turned the corner, but the rabbit was no longer to be seen. She found herself in a long, low hall, trying the key in every lock. But alas, either the locks were too large or the key was too small, but at any rate it would not open any of them. However, on the second time round, she came upon a low curtain that hung behind the door, and behind it was a little door about 15 inches high. She tried the little golden key in the lock, and to her great delight it fitted. The door opened upon a small passage, and through it she could see the loveliest garden you ever saw, bright flowers and cool fountains in the midst of it, but she could not even get her head through the doorway. "But I can't go through," said poor Alice. "Even if my head would go through, it would be of very little use without my shoulders. Oh, how I wish I could shut up like a telescope. I think if I knew how to begin, I'd find it quite easy." So many out-of-the-way things had happened lately that Alice had begun to think that very few things indeed were really impossible. She went back to the table, half hoping she might find another key on it, or at any rate a book of rules for shutting people up like telescopes. This time she found a little bottle on it, which was not there before, and the label said, "Drink me," in large letters. "No, I'll look first," said prudent Alice, "and see whether it's marked poison or not." For she had read several nice little stories about children who had been burnt and eaten up by wild beasts and other unpleasant things, all because they would not remember the simple rules their friends had taught them, such as that a red-hot poker will burn you if you hold it too long, and that if you cut your finger very deeply with a knife, it usually bleeds. However, this bottle was not marked poison, so Alice ventured to taste it, and finding it pleasant, she drank it all up. "What a curious feeling," said Alice. "I must be shutting up like a telescope." And so she was. She was now only 10 inches high, and her face brightened up at the thought that she was now the right size for going through the little door into that lovely garden. But she found that she could not open the door because she had left the key on the table above her, and she was now too small to reach it. Poor Alice! She could see the key lying on the glass table far above her, and she could see through the glass door the beautiful garden beyond, but she could not reach either. Presently her eye fell upon a little glass box that was lying under the table. She opened it and found in it a very small cake with the words, "Eat me," beautifully marked in currants. "I'll eat it," said Alice, "and if it makes me grow larger, I can reach the key, and if it makes me grow smaller, I can creep under the door. Either way, I'll get into that garden, and I don't care which happens." She ate a piece of the cake. There was a moment of suspense. "Curiouser and curiouser," cried Alice. "Now I'm opening out like the largest telescope that ever was. Goodbye, feet." For when she looked down, she could see she was only about 2 feet high. But she had not long to wait. The cake had done its work. In less than no time, she had grown to her full height again. She was so large that her head nearly touched the ceiling, and she was afraid of treading on the rabbit if it came in. "I wish I hadn't drunk quite so much," said Alice. "It was much too dark to see anything." She heard a little pattering of feet in the distance and hastened to the door of the hall, but the door would not open. She was too large. She tried again and again, but it was no use. At last she heard a voice outside, and the rabbit came to the door. It was the White Rabbit, carrying a pair of white kid gloves and a large fan. "The Duchess! The Duchess!" it cried out. "Oh, my dear paws! Oh, my fur and whiskers! She'll get me executed, as sure as ferrets are ferrets. Where can I have dropped them, I wonder?" Alice guessed in a moment that the rabbit was looking for the fan and the gloves, so she began picking them up. But she was so large that when she passed them to him, he was frightened and ran away as fast as he could go. Alice followed him out of the hall and into a garden path, but she was so enormous that she could not go far before she found that the passage was too narrow for her. She had to squeeze herself in, and she broke off pieces of the ceiling as she forced herself through. "I must go back and drink something to make me smaller," she said. She turned and made her way back, but as she went, she could not help crying. "What will become of me?" she sobbed. "I wish I had never come down here at all." She made her way back to the hall and found that there was water on the floor. In fact, the whole hall was flooded. She realized that when she was at her full height, she must have knocked over the bottle of liquid, and it had poured out. Alice began to swim. She swam through the hall and out into a corridor. The water grew deeper, and she swam faster. At last she swam out into an open space and found herself in a strange pool. There were many other creatures swimming about, a dodo, a lory, an eaglet, and a number of other curious creatures. "How in the world did you get wet?" asked the lory. "I fell into the water," said Alice. "Well, as we're all wet, we had better have a race," said the dodo. "The best way out of the water is to run a caucus race." "What is a caucus race?" asked Alice. "Why," said the dodo, "the best way to explain it is to do it." So Alice and all the other creatures ran round and round in a circle. There was no winner, and the dodo said, "Everybody has won, and all must have prizes." After the race, the creatures sat down to dry off, and Alice found herself in the middle of a conversation. "I'm afraid you've not had much experience with swimming," said the lory to Alice. "I've swum in the sea," said Alice. "In the sea?" said the lory. "I never heard of such a thing." Soon the creatures dispersed, and Alice found herself alone again. She decided to walk in the direction the creatures had gone, and soon came to a house. "This must be the rabbit's house," she said, "for the door has a bell handle and a nameplate." She rang the bell and waited. Presently a footman in livery opened the door. Inside she heard a great commotion. "Who's that at the door?" shouted a voice from somewhere in the house. "The rabbit sent me," said Alice, making up her mind to address the footman politely. "Come in," said the footman, and he stood aside to let her pass. Alice went in and found herself in a hallway. She could hear sounds of a great quarrel coming from a room above. She went upstairs and opened a door, and there was the Duchess sitting by the fire, nursing a baby. In a corner of the room sat a grinning Cheshire Cat. "Please, ma'am," said Alice, "may I ask why your cat is grinning?" "It's a Cheshire Cat," said the Duchess, "and that's why it grins. All Cheshire Cats grin. Now, if you want to know anything, you'd better ask the cat." The Duchess was having a violent argument with the cook about something, and she was speaking in a very loud voice. In fact, she was shouting so loudly that Alice could scarcely hear herself think. "Speak roughly to your little boy, and beat him when he sneezes. He only does it to annoy, because he knows it teases." Alice was horrified. The Duchess was singing to her baby, and speaking in the most dreadful manner. "Please," said Alice, "don't speak so roughly to the baby." "Mind your own business," said the Duchess. "The baby is mine, and I'll do as I please with it." At this moment the cook threw a saucepan at the Duchess, and the Duchess threw a baby at the cook. Alice quickly caught the baby as it flew through the air. "Stop it," cried Alice. "What are you doing?" But the Duchess and the cook continued to fight, and Alice, holding the baby, made her way quickly toward the door. Once outside, she found that the baby had changed into a pig. Startled, she set it down, and it trotted away into the forest. Alice walked away from the table and into the garden. The trees were growing, and the flowers were singing. She walked for a long time, and eventually came upon a croquet ground where the Queen was playing croquet. The Queen's croquet ground was a curious sight. The balls were hedgehogs, and the mallets were flamingos. The hoops were soldiers standing on their heads. "Get to your places," shouted the Queen, and Alice hurried to find a place in the line. The game was very confusing. The hedgehog balls kept curling up and running away. The flamingo mallets would turn around and look at you in the oddest way. "You're cheating," shouted the Queen whenever Alice's turn came. "Off with her head." This seemed to be the Queen's favorite expression. She kept shouting, "Off with her head," at everyone. At last the game came to an end, and the Queen announced that she was going to execute everyone on the croquet ground. But Alice was growing tired of the Queen and her constant threats of execution. She decided to try to find her way back to the beginning of her adventure. As she walked through the garden, she came upon a caterpillar sitting on a mushroom, smoking a hookah pipe. "Who are you?" asked the caterpillar. "I'm not sure," said Alice. "I'm Alice, but I've changed so many times today that I'm not quite sure who I am." "Explain yourself," said the caterpillar. "I'm afraid I can't explain myself," said Alice, "because I'm not myself, you see. Everything has changed, and I've changed too." The caterpillar took a long drag on his pipe and said, "The one side of the mushroom will make you grow taller, and the other side will make you grow shorter." Alice broke off a piece from each side of the mushroom and tested them. One side made her grow very tall, so tall that her head hit the ceiling. The other side made her shrink to a tiny size. After several attempts, she managed to get herself to a reasonable size and continued her journey. She walked through a forest and eventually came to a small house. She knocked on the door, and it was opened by a cat. "Come in," said the cat, and Alice entered the house. Inside she found the Cheshire Cat again, grinning from a fireplace. "I've lost my way," said Alice. "I don't know how to get home." "Then you must go that way," said the Cheshire Cat, pointing in one direction. "That leads to the March Hare. Or you could go that way, pointing in another direction, which leads to the Hatter. Or you could go that way, pointing in a third direction, which leads to the Queen. And if you want to meet someone really mad, you could go that way, pointing in a fourth direction. Alice thanked the cat and continued walking. She came to a road sign that pointed in all directions. She chose one at random and walked down the path. Soon she came upon a rose garden where the Queen was playing croquet again. But this time there was a beautiful rose tree in the garden that was being painted white by 3 gardeners. "Why are you painting the roses white?" asked Alice. "Because we planted the wrong roses," said the gardener. "The Queen wanted red roses, not white ones. If she finds out, she'll have our heads." "Don't tell me you're afraid of the Queen," said Alice, who was becoming less and less afraid of the Queen with each encounter. "Terrified," whispered the gardener. The Queen appeared and looked at the white roses in horror. "Off with their heads," she shouted, pointing at the gardeners. The gardeners ran away, and the Queen turned her attention to Alice. "Who are you?" demanded the Queen. "I'm Alice," said Alice, standing her ground. "Alice?" sneered the Queen. "I've never heard of you. Are you important?" "I don't think so," said Alice honestly. "Then off with your head," cried the Queen. But Alice had grown tired of the Queen's threats. She picked up a piece of the mushroom and made herself grow to an enormous size. She was now so large that she towered over the Queen. "You can't tell me what to do," said Alice defiantly. The Queen, frightened by Alice's size, turned and ran away. Alice, feeling quite pleased with herself, decided that it was time to leave Wonderland and find her way home. She walked through the gardens and found herself back at the bank where she had started. Her sister was still reading her book. "Wake up, Alice," said her sister. "You've been asleep for such a long time." Alice opened her eyes and found herself on the riverbank. The White Rabbit was nowhere to be seen. The Duchess, the Hatter, the Queen, they were all gone. "Did I dream it all?" wondered Alice. "Was Wonderland real, or was it just a dream?" She looked around and saw a white rabbit hopping across the grass in the distance. But it was an ordinary rabbit, not the one with the waistcoat and the watch. "It must have been a dream," said Alice to herself, but what a curious dream it was. She stood up and brushed off her skirt. The sun was beginning to set, and it was time to go home. As she walked back toward the house with her sister, Alice thought about her adventures. She thought about the strange creatures she had met, the nonsensical conversations, the mad tea party, and the Queen's constant threats of execution. "What a curious dream," she said again. "I wonder if Wonderland really exists somewhere, and I simply fell into it." But as she grew older, Alice would often wonder if Wonderland was real or just a dream. And whenever she saw a white rabbit, she would remember her strange adventure and smile. The end. Thank you for following Alice on her wonderful adventure. Thank you for visiting the strange and beautiful world of Wonderland. Thank you for experiencing the wonder and whimsy of Lewis Carroll's imagination. As you sleep tonight, carrying Alice's adventure with you, remember the wonder and the imagination. Remember that in dreams, anything is possible. Remember that the world is full of strange and beautiful things, if only we look for them. Sleep knowing that Wonderland exists somewhere, perhaps in our imagination, perhaps in our dreams, perhaps in the stories we tell and retell to each other. Sleep well and dream of tea parties and mad hatters, of queens and caterpillars, of gardens and mushrooms, of the endless possibilities of imagination. Good night from the Deep Sleep Channel. Sleep well, and may you dream of Wonderland tonight.